As we've already heard this week, it's becoming increasingly difficult to source people to support the growing demand pressures of global supply chains, especially in the driving and warehouse sectors. But it's obviously also extremely important to ensure the staff you do have working in your operations are trustworthy and reliable and will resist being drawn into any criminal activities. Now, this is easier said than done. Organisations are facing increasing challenges in relation to conducting effective vetting processes for new employees or contractors. And this is becoming a significant industry-wide issue for all supply chain resilience professionals, in light of increased risks of serious and organised crime, as well as the need to balance security regulatory compliance requirements with the increased focus on privacy and data protection. To discuss this critical subject, I'm delighted to be joined in the studio today by Gilad Solnick. He's Director of Security and Loss Prevention, EMEA at Amazon, and a member of the TAPA EMEA Advisory Board. Gilad, thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us here in Kalkar. I'm sure that everyone is looking forward to hearing your thoughts on the challenges of vetting in the supply chain industry. So I'm going to hand over to you right now.
Thank you very much.
You.
Great. So thanks for having me this afternoon and raising this topic, which I believe is important and, as you said, very critical to our industry. I would like to start with the general statement of security screening and vetting, which is a statement that we all familiar with. We know how much it is important to ensure that the people that are coming to work at your organization are vetted, checked, and by this we will be able to ensure safe and secure work environment. We will ensure personnel security. We will verify the credential to make sure that these are the people that we expect to onboard, and validate the preconditions of the recruitment process. We know how much organizations are investing. Physical security, barriers, access control, CCTV, and so on and so forth. And all this with the purpose to prevent the bad guys, the people that would like to harm the organization or the people within the organization from entering to the facilities and the operation that we are protecting. However, due to obvious requirements of workforce and recruiting, at some stage we are saying, okay, we'll have to open the gates and let people, and in many cases we are allowing the same people that we want to prevent from joining the organization, we are allowing them to enter. I will show you some numbers that are reflecting the incidents and the criminal activity that is occurring due to internal threat. And I think everybody is familiar with the common statements of 70 to 80% of losses or crimes within organization are caused by internal involvement. And these are some of the numbers that we can see here related to violence, fraud and abuse, shrinkage, and so on and so forth. So there are numbers that are supporting this threat and risk that we are facing, and we need to dive deeper in order to understand where those losses and risks are happening in order to be able to prevent them effectively through processes such as vetting and screening. If we're taking in the cargo industry, the transportation, and I'm using here numbers from TAPA and from cargo theft report, what we see is that the internal theft is actually representing relatively low number. It's not in the top 5. If we are referring to the general modus operandi, losses of major cases, or even losses of lesser value impact. What we can see that those are relatively low in the scale. However, I truly believe that those that are representing higher numbers are also contributed and involving the activity of internal bad actors. And this is something which is invisible, but we should not ignore it. Statistically, if we don't know, there is a high chance that involvement of internal actors is included there. Here we see as well theft by employee, but of those statistics, which is only the third player to 12%, but theft from facility and theft from container or trailer definitely could be with the involvement of internal players. Some cases of major losses that occurred recently, just to strengthen the statement of the internal involvement. And we see here people are stealing from a mobile phone from the load, and here in the warehouse also in Italy, major case of losses. Now, how it is done? We have multiple MOs, modus operandi, including freight exchange, and I will elaborate about this a little bit later. We have the regular internal theft, that employees having opportunity and abusing their access to the loads, to the operation, and are stealing from employer or being contracted and stealing from the contracting company. Fake documentation by drivers is also a potential risk that could be considered as internal threat, because we are relying that this is the driver that we are expecting. We're handing over the loads, and eventually it is not. Regarding freight exchange, I'm referring here to companies that will pretend to be a legitimate carrier, and with lack of vetting and due diligence of those organizations, we are putting our loads and assets at risk. Now, one of the things that we are relying is compliance and standard, and we believe that at certain level, the measures that are in place, and for example, the TIR requirements will protect our goods, because we will be able to detect any tamper of the loads, and we will have tamper evidence indicators like seal. We'll have the TIR codes that will protect our loads, and so on. However, we know, and it's becoming more and more evident, that those measures that should provide us the comfort and the assumption that our load is intact when it's arriving to us, it's not the case. We see many cases that the TIR codes are manipulated, having additional lengths that can be used in order to open the back doors without tampering the seals. We know that in many cases the hinges of the back doors are being tampered and opened, so there's no need to open the seal in order to get access to the load. There are access from the roof, and so on and so forth. Now, is this related to what I was talking about, vetting and due diligence? I believe so, because what we see is that the organizations that are working for us, or the people that are working for us, are actually abusing the existing measures of confidence and stealing from us. And this is something that we need to address as part of the preventative measures. Vetting is not only to check who are the people, but also that they are doing what they're supposed to do in the right way. One example that relates to the challenge of who is conducting the operation on our behalf, carriers, subcontractors, and so on. I'm using here a definition that is from North America, from the United States, and this is the Chameleon carriers. And it's related in this context mainly to the safety of those operators. And in many cases, those that are not meeting the required level of safety are being removed, and they are not allowed by the authorities to operate on the road. However, they are very quickly changing name, address, location, email registration, and so on and so forth. And actually, we're playing this whack-a-mole game that they are popping, we're dealing with them, then they are popping again, and so on and so forth. And this is very relevant also in Europe. We see it as well, that if we are catching an organization that is stealing or safety non-compliant, very shortly after, we see the same operator under different identity. And this is something that we need as an industry to take care of, to ensure that we will be able to prevent those from coming and rising up again and infiltrate the industry. When coming to vetting and screening, we are all familiar with the GDPR requirements, making sure that only authorized entities will have access to very sensitive, rightfully, very sensitive information of individuals. So it needs to be under control of an official authority, and they need to be authorized by law to provide appropriate safeguards, and only under those controls that the information should be processed and handled. On the other hand, on one hand, we see organizations like TAPA, like the EU, with the Authorized Economic Operator, and the US Customs Trade Partnership Against Terrorism, CTPAT, requiring that organizations will conduct those vettings to ensure that the integrity and the safety of their network. But on the other hand, and I mentioned GDPR earlier, we see that employers that are eager to ensure that the people that are working for them have no criminal record could face fines if they are not following those strict regulations. And then we need to understand, even if we could vet and have the background, what does it really give us? Criminal background check, and even going to extreme like polygraph, will give us the history. Like it's mentioned, it does not foresee the future. It's only a background, a history. Can we identify risks at the present? Person that did not do something in the past, but he has the capability or the intention to do so? Can we foresee the future? And these are the questions. How can we better improve the vetting process and the risk management in this aspect? Everything that I mentioned earlier obviously need to be done in a balance. What we are trying to achieve, we are trying to protect assets. We are trying to ensure the security and the safety of the personnel in the workplace. And we ensure the duty of care as an employer to make sure that your people are coming to work and they are safe there. On the other hand, there are the rights to be forgotten, the right for privacy, and even the right for second chance. Sometimes people that made mistakes are not going to do them again, and we need to balance this as well. When we are looking at statistics that refers to background checks and vetting, we see that based on the ACFE, Association of Certified Fraud Examiners, that on their study from 2018, we see that only 52% of victim organizations of fraud and abuse in a workplace did those checks. And only 10% of those checks yielded and revealed some red flags on the vetting. So it's a very small portion of success. Is this reflecting the real risk? Is it only this proportion of the population that had criminal records or criminal activities in the background? I'm not sure. And why? Because what we see here that The other studies are showing that in many cases, organizations are not reporting those cases to police because it requires resources, it requires time, and sometimes there are preferences of the organization not to go to this extent, and many organizations do not have this approach of zero tolerance to those violations. I would like to give another example of the challenge. The table here below, on the left, sorry, shows the transition of the recently debated topic of drivers availability. And what we see here that while in many countries in the last 5 years the number of drivers shrinked, there's a very large increase in some other countries. One of them is Romania. 30%, over 30% growth in the last 5 years in the number of drivers. Now, in Romania, there is currently an option to change the name, the personal name, the identity of a person, multiple times. Which means that if you want to conduct an effective criminal record check or any other reference check, you might be facing no results that will be inconclusive or not available because you are checking a name that was changed recently and will not reveal the true history of a person. So this is example of another element of challenge that we are facing as an industry when we're trying to do those checks. What are the checks that are available in the market? Well, I divided them in this table for passive and active. Some of them are not even realistic to conduct. Here, this is the expected coverage. So can we identify past convictions, past violations, even not convicted, future risk and red flags? And then evaluation, is it reliable? Is it available across the EU? Is it complying to the GDPR requirements? What is the speed of the results? Because this is also a factor. How much time you will wait until the results are coming? And what is the cost, which is obviously a consideration. And we see criminal record checks, background checks including open source intelligence and references, pre-employment reference, those are the passive methods. Polygraph, which we know it is not acceptable in most of the countries. Personality or integrity assessment, and security interview. So obviously the last two are quite effective, but they are requiring complex process and touch points in the recruitment process. And this is something that we need to take into consideration when choosing what are the right methodologies that we're going to use. So, following all the points that I mentioned, we have several options. One is continue to do this and say that we want to do better vetting, better checks, while at the same time we know that the limitations are so big that it will render those efforts ineffective. Or that we can continue to influence legislation and allow effective vetting while ensuring the privacy and the compliance to those requirements. And we should improve available vetting options and technologies and capabilities. We need to improve the incident reporting and making sure that bad actors are visible to the industry. Making sure that personal information is secured as per the privacy requirements. But bad actors, and I'm referring to organizations, companies that are infiltrating the industry, should be visible, and there should be mechanism to enable the organizations to detect them and to prevent them from infiltrating the operation. And this is related to the due diligence capability. In addition to this, we need to improve the common tamper indicators as an industry to deter and prevent abuse and mishandling. And we need to improve the compliance enforcement of those measures that are aiming to give additional level of integrity to our operation. Those are the points that I wanted to share, and I will be very happy to take some questions.
Thank you so much, Gilad. Thank you for your very thought-provoking and insightful presentation. We have lots of questions. Well, we have a few, and I'm sure more will come in. So the first question I wanted to ask you really is, what should the private sector and authorities be focusing on to address the issues really that you've just highlighted?
As I mentioned briefly in the presentation, I think that it is crucial that we will work together, share information, both sides, and enable each other to be more effective in, first of all, in catching the bad guys and remove them as a risk, but also to enable the industry to have better capabilities to identify those risks when it's approaching them. It is understood that obviously law enforcement cannot share everything that they have, but we need to find a mechanism that will enable both ends to have better understanding of the risk and practical measures to collaborate and to prevent those risks from materialize.
Thanks, Gilad. And just a reminder to anyone watching, if you do want to send in a question, we've got a few minutes, so make sure you do it as quickly as you can. As we heard yesterday, Gilad, in the case of fake carriers, losses can often be prevented through quite simple due diligence checks. Is this also the case in terms of employee recruitment?
I think that the difference here is that the privacy and as I mentioned, the balance between the rights of a person and the rights of an employer to protect himself are more delicate, I would say. While it is clear that people that are creating those fake carriers have malintention and that they have a criminal activity planned. When we are talking about people that are going through a vetting process, we need to be extra careful to make sure that we are not disqualifying people which have no malintention. And we need to strike the right balance here and make sure that we are taking some risks. Also, we need to take risk in terms of operational requirements of the organization. They need more people, and we need to help them as security organization to create risk management and not a rigid approach that will disqualify and sometimes will harm the organizations in their operational intention.
So how do you help more then?
By creating risk assessment, providing levels of risk and agree on the risk appetite with the organization, making sure that we are behaving responsibly and carefully. And when we need to take risk, we are applying the mitigation measures to accommodate those additional risks that we are taking.
We move on to another question. Is advice linked to employee vetting another area in which you think that TAPA EMEA can offer more support then to its members? And if they can, what would be the most useful thing, do you think?
I think that the strength of TAPA was always their capability to bridge between the law enforcement and the private sector. And I think this is the key here, to create this platform to share information. The IAS is one of those platforms, but definitely we need to find better ways to share information about bad actors, fake carriers, chameleon carriers, and so on, to help the industry to protect itself from those risks.
So we've had some questions coming in. Recruitment is a huge challenge in the logistics industry. Does this increase the likelihood of companies taking more chances on people they can't easily verify? And what does this mean in terms of the risk and the liability?
Well, as I said, when you have limited options to vet and people need to hire employees and workforce, they will have to take those risks. And this was traditionally many years in the challenge in the industry, where there are countries that you cannot have criminal records in Europe. And therefore, employers are looking for the best option they have in order to mitigate those risks. And there are, as I showed, there are many ways to do this. The security or recruiting forms that will highlight or statement that people do not have criminal records and things that are aiming to deter, to create some kind of friction that will enable the detection of potential risk in the recruiting process.
So another question that's just come in is, could there be an employee vetting standard, do you think, or best practice maybe, that would help to introduce some standardization in the recruitment process, but at the same time without compromising security standards?
I believe that standard would be difficult to achieve across the various industries and definitely across Europe. I strongly believe that best practices could be shared, and also there should be discussion with the regulatory bodies what can be done in order to ensure the security and safety of businesses, which impact the economy, and definitely the people that are working in those organizations, because we don't want people that put risk on other people joining those workplaces, because we want people going to work and knowing that they are safe and secured in their workplace.
Let's look at temporary workers, because there are a lot of temporary workers in the logistics sector. Are employment agencies, do you think, doing enough to vet the candidates in those employment agencies? And are those vetting standards sufficient, or should they always base their checks on maybe their clients' specific requirements?
Well, this is obviously, as I mentioned earlier, there are so many limitations in this aspect of vetting, and therefore I cannot say that those agencies are doing enough. They could do more, and we need to influence the industry as a whole to ensure that they will do more. Share the best practices and use as much as possible available resources. I believe that that the key here is also the employer that need to define what his risk approach and risk appetite based on the actual risk. So companies that are dealing with operations and products that are less targeted will probably have higher risk appetite than companies that are dealing with high value products. And they might request additional security measures and vetting measures from their suppliers.
You mentioned during your presentation the Chameleon companies and this sort of whack-a-mole situation. Challenges like that, are they constantly evolving? I mean, how difficult is it to keep up with the challenges? And are there new challenges always emerging?
In our business, risks and challenges are constantly evolving. So when we are finding a way to deal with specific modus operandi or threat or risk, the other side will always try to circumvent the measures that we are applying and to find new ways to gain profit. So definitely, even I believe that even if we will find excellent ways to deal with the Chameleon carriers, they will evolve as well. With our preventative measures, they will evolve, and we will have to continue. I think this is one of the challenges in our profession.
Fantastic, Gilad. Just as if everyone was taking one key takeaway, what would your sort of final message be?
We need to continue focus on those preventative measures, and I strongly believe in, throughout my career, I always stated that persistence will beat resistance. So we need to continue and to push forward those measures, because eventually I'm sure that we will gain success in this area.
Gilad, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you very much.
Very enjoyable and interesting presentation.
My pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.